Well, to unpack the latest CPI data for us, I'm joined by Matshego. He's a senior economist at Nedbank. Thanks very much, Isaac, for joining us. So this is a good print because it's lower than the previous print. Just unpack the latest data for us.
Thank you, Nompo. It is encouraging not only because it fell, but also because it's lower than what the market had generally expected. A number of around 5.5 was the forecast. But the detail is also quite encouraging. I mean, looking at the food inflation numbers that you just highlighted, the meat prices are rising at less than 1% year on year. And that's very, very encouraging. Take into account that there had been some pressure late last year due to the avian flu outbreak. But the concern is with egg prices, which seem to be still suffering from the lingering effects of the outbreak rather. Insurance prices were the big driver because they surveyed in March, and also education fees. And those are increased at expected rates, I will say. So they will help to basically keep inflation under control in the coming months.
Yeah. So do you think that we can begin to see inflation trending downwards, or do you think there are just too many risks?
Well, there are risks in the short term. We're worried about the drier weather conditions. We're worried about the likely higher oil prices due to the geopolitical uncertainties, and of course, definitely the impact on the rand, which has taken a bit of a beating in recent days. But generally, our forecasts indicate that inflation will ease, particularly in the final quarter of this year, and that should give the Reserve Bank some room to cut interest rates.
Yeah, so speaking about the Reserve Bank, the next MPC meeting is in May, and there's still so much more that could happen in the interim. They'll have the CPI data for March. They'll have it for April, and possibly sometimes the CPI number comes out just before they deliberate on interest rates. They may have the one for May as well, for March, April and May. They might get that data. If that data is favorable and they see a downward trend, do you think that could positively influence them to actually make a move on interest rates downwards?
Well, the next meeting is on the 30th of May, and at that time they'll have the April numbers. So we don't at all expect that, those numbers will sway the Reserve Bank. Remember that things will just be a bit more uncertain than it is right now. Hopefully on the geopolitical front, there will be some stability, but locally it will be a day after the national elections. The outcome will not be known at that time. The rand could be under pressure at that time, and the current definitely, hits us on imported prices, particularly those of fuel.
So we had the IMF come out with its World Economic Outlook yesterday. It seemed to downwardly revise South Africa's economic growth number for 2024, but only by a smidgen. Before they pegged it at 1% for 2024, but now at 0.9%. Is that pretty much in line or way below your expectations for 2024?
Well, the IMF's number is pretty much in line with what we expect. Downside risks are elevated, but we do acknowledge that there are positives happening locally, particularly on the electricity front and also the rail and ports front. And those are, if the global environment remains favorable, we see commodity prices, particularly gold and copper, continuing to rise, and global demand firming a bit as global interest rates start to fall. There is a very good chance that economic growth will be stronger than currently expected in South Africa for 2024 and 2025.
Yeah, one of the things that keeps on coming up as an issue, not just from the IMF, but other observers, is this issue of countries making sure that their fiscal balances are in check, particularly in a year where we have elections in many countries in the world, sort of suggesting that, policymakers are going to loosen the purse strings in order to appease, voters in given countries. But Would you say that's been the observation made for South Africa? Because they seem to be still sticking with, very strict fiscal line when we look at what happened in the February budget.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely is always the case in other countries, but definitely not in South Africa. The National Treasury has got a history of prudent budgeting. We have not seen spending, particularly recurrent spending or even capital spending, literally exceeding the non-election years. Budgeting continues to be in line with the medium-term and long-term plans of the National Treasury. And in this year's budget, I mean, that was very clear. The concern is about the rate at which government debt is increasing, and the budget basically was leaning towards reducing the increase in government debt even further.